I know you're there.
He
Is
gets red or
everyone
blue.
here? Red. Red.
Oops. That was what I meant to do.
Oh my god. Guys, stop bullying him.
Get to see what our buttons do.
Oh my god. Okay. So, first of all, I'll start with traits. So, basically, blood magic. We are taking Lesser Well of Blood, Life from Death, and Unholy Martyr. So, Lesser Well of Blood is from this trait, and you summon a Lesser Well of Blood to heal nearby allies when you start reviving someone. So if someone's downstate and you start reviving them, every 30 seconds you will spawn a Lesser Well of Blood that will heal people. In that area, it's also a light field, so if anyone blast finishers it, it's an AoE cleanse. You, as a Necro, don't have any blast finishers, but it is a light field nonetheless, and that's important to note.
I'm lost already. Where do you see Lesser Will of Blood?
So if you open up your hero panel and go to your build in the trait line Blood Magic, it is the top trait in the
it's
first
one.
column.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, there you go. Also, your passive, which is this thing, which is the first thing. This is one of your passives because it's a lesser. So every time you dodge roll, you will put down a mark in combat. So it'll put down a mark, and then if someone touches that mark, then it triggers and will heal people. Oh, hi, mark. Yeah, pretty much. It does a little bit. It does barely any damage. It gives regen and it gives some bleeding, but it doesn't do that much damage. But it's you dodge, you get that. So anytime you dodge, you give people regen if you dodge into enemies and stuff. Then your second passive, which is Vampiric, siphon health whenever you hit a foe. Minions siphon health and transfer it to you. So basically, anytime you hit somebody, you steal a little bit of their HP. It's not a ton, but you steal some health from people anytime you hit them. Next is Life from Death, which heal allies in an area when you exit Shroud, and it also increases your outgoing healing to other allies by 10%. Just passively all the time. So any skill that directly heals people, such as, or not even a skill, anything that directly heals people, such as regen that you apply to the people, will be 10%, like, will heal people 10% more per tick, pretty much. So your regen will heal more. Next is Last Rites, which is, as long as you are not downed, allies near you do not bleed out if they are downstate, meaning they don't deteriorate health like they normally would if they're downstate. And you'll also notice that your healing power amount increases the lower amount of HP you have. So the lower health you have, the more barrier you give out and more healing you give out. Because barrier, which is what you spam on Scourge, scales with your healing power stat. So the more healing power you have, the more barrier you give out to people. So when things are getting like rough in a fight and people are low health and you're low health, you give out a ton more barrier because you can get up to 450 more healing power. You're above 75% health, 150 healing power from Last Rites is passive and is all the time. So you always have 150 more healing power than you normally would without blood magic. And below 75, you get another 150, and then below 50% health, you get another 150 for a total of 450 bonus if you're below 50% health. And your health pool is very big. You've 27k health. as Heal Scourge, which is a lot of health compared to a lot of classes. The next thing is Unholy Martyr, which is entering Shroud, which is your F5. That Sandstorm Shroud is your Shroud. So anything that relates to Shroud, such as Life from Death, heal allies when in an area when you exit Shroud. So you hit Sandstorm Shroud, it pulses, and then after the final pulse, it will heal allies in an area around you, like direct healing for their health and not barrier. And Unholy Martyr shares that sort of thing. So when you hit that button, it transfers condies from your teammates to you, and then it will consume those conditions to give you life force, which then you can in turn be able to use more Shroud skills, which is your Nefarious Favor, Sand Cascade, and Garish Pillar. Now, with your shade skills, your shades last 15 seconds. That's your F1. So you want to put that somewhere with intent, pretty much, because you only get a new one every 15 seconds and you only have 3. So you don't want to spam all 3 unless it's like a really rough clash. And then if you spam 3, you give more people barrier, because it is basically, if you read the tooltip for shade, all of the things it says about the shade counts as one shade. So if you have 3 shades out, it'll do that stuff 3 times. So it'll give so currently it is 2 people get barrier from your shade. And if you have 3 shades out, then your stuff, all your skills, all your shade skills trigger 3 times. Like Sandstorm Shroud and Sand Cascade, because it triggers on you and it triggers in on your shades. So
I have a note.
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, but Sandstorm Shroud, the barrier part of Sandstorm Shroud and the boon part only triggers around you, not around the shades, which is, it's a weird thing with the shades, because some stuff triggers on more people, some stuff on less people, sometimes. And in PvE, it's completely different. It's a little bit of a mess, to be honest.
Thanks, ain't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
So you want to put the sand shade around you, not around people?
Well, how it works is all your shades, all your shade skills, like if your F2 to F5, all of those trigger both around you and around your shade, except like Sandstorm Shroud is a little weird sometimes, but basically the more shades you have out, the more those skills trigger, but you want to use your shades sparingly and with intent and purpose, because of them being a limited resource. And the circle that appears around your shade, that it doesn't actually affect just that area. So when you place your shade, you'll notice there's a big circle around the inner circle. That is the size of your shade and how far it reaches. It's a pretty big radius that it affects.
So when you say go into Shroud, what you're saying is when you have a shade present, or what does that mean?
No.
Shroud is your F5. So when you go into Shroud, that's whenever you press your F5 button. That is your Shroud button.
Okay.
But the rest of the skills are like effect or your shade skills, pretty much. So when you have a shade out, all of those skills trigger again. So each shade, your shade skills get triggered by that, pretty much.
You can also see it. You can visually see it. If you place a shade and then say press F2, see an effect on the shade go off and around you, like a visual
Yes.
graphic effect.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah,
Next
your
is
F5 is for when you're like pushing with the commander or something. You want to use it when you're on tag. If you're standing back and he's up there and you've got your other shades down there doing everything, if you hit F5 here, he's not getting shit.
yeah. Another important thing to note about Sandstorm Shroud, like when you press it, you'll notice like it visually has a circle around you that is like growing and stuff. That circle is bugged and scales with your character size, so you need to be aware of the radius that it actually affects and not trust the circle on the ground, pretty much, when you press that button. Because if your character size is huge, the circle will be huge, but it doesn't actually affect that entire circle. It still only affects the 180, the 300 radius. So like, don't trust the visual. Trust read the tooltip, basically, for that skill. Because it scales with your character size. So if you are an Asura, it will be small. If you are a big Norn, like Rio's Tempest, then it is going to be gigantic. But next is Soul Reaping, which is it's like sort of like a typically like, oh, you use this for offensive stuff, but like it can be used for both because of the traits. But no matter the necro that you're playing, if you're Reaper or Scourge, you always want to take Speed of Shadows, which when you enter Shroud, it removes Cripple, Chill, and Immob when you press it. So again, that pairs with your F5 skill. So when you hit your F5, you give yourself Swiftness, and it removes Cripple, Chill, and Immobilize from you, which is very powerful. Because if you are immobed, you can directly get rid of the immob by pressing your shroud, if you have it, of course.
Perchance, do you know if Unholy Martyr triggers first and then Speed of Shadows? So you pull condition. I haven't paid enough attention to notice it. If you pull condies first and cleanse then, or if it tries to cleanse and then pulls the condies. I'm not entirely sure.
I imagine it will. That's a good question, actually.
We should test this. We should test this
I can
out.
figure it out, but it's probably because when you press your Speed of Shadows, you get the Swiftness instantly. I'm not sure about Unholy Martyr, which one triggers first, but it probably is fine. Next in your Soul Reaping, your is Vital Persistence, which is this. And basically that says you just get a flat increase to vitality, and any healing done to you is increased by 10%. So, funny fact, regen counts as incoming healing increase. So regen you apply to yourself is 10% more effective to yourself because of that trait. So, and you give regen, and that's your main healing. So like you just heal yourself more with regen. And so basically your regen on yourself and regen on allies is the same amount of healing if you are equipped with the greatsword and not the axe warhorn, pretty much, which is just a fun fact. Next is Eternal Life, which gain life force every interval up to the threshold when not in Shroud. Gain protection when you enter Shroud. So basically, what this says, every 1 second, you will passively gain life force up to, like 20% of your life force total ish. So it just by existing, you get free life force with this trait, and when you hit Sandstorm Shroud, you pulse out protection to your friends, which is very powerful, because that eternal life pairs with Herald of Sorrow, which is in Scourge trait line, which that says you give protection when you enter Shroud. So you're giving a ton of protection by pressing that button. And Prot is a 33% damage reduction from anything, which is very powerful. And then
The eternal life protection is only for you, though, but it's still a thing you want.
yeah,
I mean, the other traits, you don't need to take the other traits, they're useless. So that's the best you can get in as the Grandmaster on Soul Reaping.
but next is Abrasive Grit, which is in Scourge, which granting an ally barrier removes conditions from them and grants might. So anytime you give barrier, you remove conditions from your team. So any skill that says it gives barrier, such as Sand Cascade, Sandstorm Shroud, Sand Flare, Serpent Siphon, all of those will remove conditions from your team. The next important thing to note is one of your passives in Scourge, called Sand Sage, which is your second passive. You gain concentration and expertise when you have a shade active. And what this means basically is if you are using Holographic Super Drumstick, which you can either use Holographic Super Drumstick for more barrier, or you can use the Bountiful Maintenance Oil for slightly more healing in terms of raw healing, and that would pair with like your Exit Shroud, you give healing out, and your regen and stuff. But if you have Holographic Super Drumstick equipped, when you put out a shade, because of what Holographic Super Drumstick does, you gain more healing power when a shade is active, so you give more barrier when you have that trait. When you have a shade active and you have that specific utility item, when you have a shade active, you give more barrier, pretty much.
Bet you're glad you have that now, Rio.
Mm-hmm.
But
Me,
the
no.
next thing, the next passive, which is also good, says Blood as Sand. It reduces all incoming damage taken when you have a shade active. So whenever you have your F1 on the floor, you take a flat 7% damage reduction. So you're very tanky if you have a shade out. And the next thing is Desert Empowerment, which when manifests Sand Sage, when you summon a Sand Shade, it will give barrier around where you summon it, and it will give Vigor, which it used to give a lack, but now it's Vigor, and Vigor just means people can dodge more because of that. It'll give barrier to 5 teammates, Vigor to 5 people, and that's pretty much. And the reason you take that is because of the barrier from pressing Manifest Sand Sage. It'll give barrier to your friends around you, and that pairs with the whenever you give barrier, it cleanses conditions, so you cleanse condies by using that button. And the next thing I will go to, if there's no questions thus far, is there any questions?
Does Blood as Sand stack?
What?
No.
It used to. It doesn't anymore. It used to be an amount per shade, and they changed it to just have if you have a shade, which is a lot more, which is better.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
And if you really wanted to, because your cooldown on shade is 15 seconds and it stays up for 15 seconds, if you really want to have that concentration and that damage reduction, you can have it up permanent. basically.
Yeah,
You just
for
time them
like
out.
45 seconds, basically, if you like time it out. And then by the time the 45 seconds pass, then it just keeps rolling, so you can keep that buff forever if you time it right. Next, I will go through your utility skills. So, Sand Flare, which is your heal skill, gives yourself barrier separately from ally barrier. So, it's a higher coefficient for yourself than it is for friends. But the higher healing power you have, the closer it is together. But you give barrier with that button, and it boons on enemies are converted into conditions when you press that button. So it's both a give a ton of barrier button, a self heal, and it gives torment, it gives boon rip, and it's very strong. And because we are using Relic of Flock, you give extra barrier by pressing that button and extra healing by using that relic for Sand Flare. Next is Trail of Anguish, which is your stun break, but you also use it as a offensive button. So basically, this is your snail trail button. You leave out a big trail of sand and stuff behind you wherever you walk, and basically what it does is any friend that touches it gets a stack of stability and swiftness. Up to 10 friends on your team will get a stack of stab and swiftness from hitting that button. Additionally, if you press that button and you run through a bunch of enemies, it'll convert conditions on 10 enemies at a time with Trail of Anguish. So it is a very strong button, both offensively and defensively, because it's your only stun break, but it also strips boons, it gives stab, just one stack, and it gives swiftness. So it's a strong button because it all those things. It also gives torment and burning, of course. Next is Serpent Siphon, which is another very strong button. Which it unleashes a ghostly serpent towards where you press it. Basically, it will give regen, it will poison enemies, it'll give barrier in the area around where you send it. It'll also give Aegis and as well, so it'll give one block. It also converts converts boons into conditions on enemies. So basically, in the middle of a melee clash, you use that on your feet to give Aegis and regen and strip boons and give poison, and it's very strong and give barrier as well. So it's basically like you want to typically use it on your feet, but you can also use it on the tail if you need to give them barrier and Aegis and regen. So you can use it as a try and help the tail button as well. But it also removes conditions, and if you started to notice, a lot of your buttons remove boons. Pretty much all of them remove boons in your utility. And then the next thing you have is Well of Corruption, which also removes boons in a targeted area. You also use this on Reaper, but you also use it on Scourge. It's an unblockable converting boons on foes into conditions, and you could target that. And next is your big button, which is Ghastly Breach. This is your huge button. Basically, in an area around you, it places where you are currently standing in the world. It'll place there, and basically this big bubble of sand that converts boons into conditions. It gives slow per pulse. It gives burning. It gives torment, and it also gives might to your friends. So it converts boons. It gives might per pulse. It gives slow per pulse. It does damage, and it's just huge boon rip. By pressing that button. So you rip a ton of boons as Scourge. because of all of your skills pretty much do it. And then you also have Nightfall, which is on your greatsword that also converts boons into conditions. And that is also another huge button. Because it gives blindness per pulse, it gives cripple per pulse, it converts boons to conditions, and it's just super strong. And then in Axe Warhorn, your boon rips in Axe Warhorn is Unholy Feast, which is your Axe 3. It basically is an AoE triple boon remove button on a 12-second cooldown, so you can relatively spam it. You also have your Warhorn 4, which is a fear effect, so it can remove a stack of stab on 5 people, which isn't a lot, but it may or may not remove the final stack of stab from someone if you already haven't ripped it completely. And then they die because they have no stab. And then your Locust Swarm, which is another good button. Basically, it puts locusts around you and your subgroup, and it will siphon health from them, and it will heal your friends, give swiftness, heal you as well, and it will give you life force. So it's basically you're leeching their health away from them, is what that does. And
You're leeching your group's health?
no, the enemy.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Your friends are stealing health from the enemy group, and using it as their own health, and it's basically that's how it works. But that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. It's mostly resource management and timing of your skills, and that's pretty much the most important things about Scourge is. Go ahead.
Okay, I got a question. When you get bombed on, or when I say bunker down, what's the rotations? I just want to know the rotations. New people need to know the rotations. What skills do we hit if we get caught by surprise?
You just hit like Sand Flare and barrier buttons. Like you hit Sandstorm Shroud, Sand Cascade, you activate a shade, you hit Sand Flare, Serpent Siphon. That's your heal skill.
Ideally, you start with F1 to have your shade down.
Yeah.
And then you just go. If it's really hairy, don't think. Just press all the F buttons at once. If it's really hairy, just hit all of them. They have no cast time, so you can use them even if you're stunned.
Yes.
Which is especially F3, F5 is if you're stunned and you need barrier up, you can use this. Otherwise, I think the hardest part about the build is learning to read the enemy when they're doing their bomb, because you don't want to barrier up too early, because if you do it too early, your barrier goes away and the bomb hits you and you don't have barrier anymore and you don't have any skills anymore to keep the barrier out, and you don't want to do it too late because then people are already dead. So
you also want to space out your barrier, because you can overcap, because the maximum barrier you can give is 50% of someone's health. So if you're overcapping the barrier, then you're wasting resources. So you want to space it out.
Yeah, it's similar to Firebrand in that way, where you don't want to just panic push all your buttons and pump out all the Aegis at once. You want to get into a rhythm. You want to do the same thing with your barrier when you can.
Yeah, since the nerfs, it's a little bit harder to overcast on barrier, because they're in general a little bit smaller. But the really big ones are your heal skill and the combined F skills. So if I would, on a push, I would go with the F1, F3, and F5 in a little bit spaced out,
Yeah.
and then keep the heal skill for a second bomb or a second hit. Maybe it really, you have to kind of see what the enemy is doing. It's
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
you can't just press your buttons and you're always right all the time. You have to adapt.
When you say you're using your F buttons, are you also putting your sand shades down first, or are you just?
Yes.
I would at least have one shade down before I press any other F button. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because they all have a target cap of 2 for your allies, with the exception of F5. So if you want to hit more than 2 people, you need 1 shade down, then you hit 4. If you have 2 shades down, you hit 6. And if you have 3 shades down, you hit 8.
Yeah.
But you don't want all 3 shades down at the same time, because you always want something in reserve in case you don't win in one push, basically.
Yeah, you don't want to blow everything too early, because then you will literally feel completely useless. Question, say I have 3 shades down, then there are only 4 enemies. Then I press F4, do I get more fear duration?
No, we don't.
No. I think it just hits more people.
Yeah.
So, like, there is a cap.
If you have 2 shades and there's 1 guy, you only hit him once. If you
Yeah.
hit F4.
Yeah, it's...
So say the Fiddy's saying, okay, Quicken Powers, we're going to be pushing on Mimi in 5 seconds.
Yeah.
I would drop a shade on us, and then when we start moving out, I drop a shade where we're going.
I wouldn't
And
use
then-
the first shade, actually. I would always drop the shade where we're going.
Yeah,
I
'cause
always
it does-
drop one where we're at to catch the tail, so the tail has barrier as we're pushing in.
Yeah,
that's
I
fair.
know I'll have another shade
Yeah.
come up in time, once we reposition.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's all like situational based, and you figure it out as you're playing it, because it is very forgiving as a build, because you have so much health. So
Actually,
like,
continue
Go
on
ahead.
in that vein. You dropped the sand shade where Fiddy is. You dropped the sand shade headed towards Mimi, and then what did you do?
And then as we're engaging, that's when I would hit the F3. I'd hit the F5 as we're, really fighting over here. And then, as he's calling for breach, I'll hit breach. If he picks a spot for wells, throw your wells there. Just, once you engage, you're kind of gauging where the enemy's going for where your next match of things is going to go. Like, they're fighting over there, so I'll throw snakes. Now, okay, we got a spot where you're fighting. I'll throw a well there.
yeah, it's just it's a lot of like just situational, like you have to figure out while you're playing sort of deal, because it is one of those builds where it's like it's a lot of patience and you're waiting for something to happen, and while you're waiting you're just holding all your buttons basically. Where other stuff like Firebrand or Chrono, you're basically always rolling your stab and stuff. When you're like posturing for a fight, you're always like rolling stab and boons and stuff. But Scourge, it's a lot of wait until thing happen and then adjust accordingly to that thing happening. And because you have so much health and you give so much barrier, it's very forgiving in that sense. And as you get better at it, the more autopilot it'll be for you to manage your buttons, because that's all it is really. It's just resource management, and adjusting to what is happening in a fight, pretty much, and holding your cooldowns for calls. Like never use your breach unless Fiddy asks for it, pretty much. Because it's 72-second cooldown. So if you miss it, it's bad. Whereas like if you miss your Nightfall, it's a 30-second cooldown, which is a lot more forgiving than a 72-second one. And also you just hold your Grasping Darkness for if he calls for pulls, which is Greatsword 5. And yeah, it's pretty simple in that sense.
Nice.
Yeah, that's pretty
Yep.
much it.
Get the party started now.
Heck yeah.